Welcome to this podcast is Uncalled For.
What's uncalled for about it?
What we doing at Tijuana?
You met a girl, didn't you? I was like, oh, how did you know? He's like, oh, because it always happens. It always happens. It's the only stupid reason that you would ever drop the ROTC, because of a stupid girl.
And then look, thank you back home.
Oh, that's going to be great for the football charts.
Oh yeah, absolutely, yeah.
I can think of 100 right off the top of my head.
Is paid a genre?
So it just, a lot happens behind the scene that people don't know about. Like, it's hard for the average voter to understand how much of what they think is their democracy is decided by faceless people to them. You know, you and I know who's making these decisions.
There you go. These are the kind of discussions we have. Fortunately, we're both fairly level-headed people. Again, we're looking at each other in the eye. We're not going to say anything derogatory to the other person. And, of course, neither of us is drunk.
Take me to Gay's barbecue.
That's a bit of a slap in the face and an insult.
But you didn't even give him a chance for a wild card spot.
And the look on Mike's face.
They love big boys like you.
It's kind of, what is that character from Guardians of the Galaxy who takes everything literally? The people are out there, like, they could have taken it literally.
Yeah, we're crazy people and we love what we do, and so we just keep creating regardless of how hard it can be sometimes.
Thank you, and thank you for having me on your podcast.
Oh, absolutely.
And remember, no you.
That is uncalled for, Michael.
And now, your host for this podcast, Mike Chernevsky.
I have a lot more on this tape. Here. Listen to this.
Well, the name of this podcast is Stuff Uncalled For? This podcast is uncalled. Podcast, all right.
And all y'all, subscribe and like and comment and subscribe.
Yeah.
I said it. Fuji.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the podcast. Today we're doing another bit of citizen journalism. So, recently we did the Royals public meetings, and today it's another public meeting. This one for the Kansas City Area Transportation Authority, and they're almost a year now study on an east-west transit corridor. It's called the East-West Transit Study. So before I actually turn it over to the public meeting, a little background on this. So as everyone knows, in 2016, we finally got some form of rail transits in our fair city, in the form of a starter line for the Kansas City streetcar. That starter line continues to run just as a starter line today, and we are recording this February of 2023. They have had well over 11 million passengers, and they're continuing to rebound from pre-pandemic level. Well, they're not quite pre-pandemic levels, but they have been steadily rebounding and all that. So that's a good thing. Especially a good thing because they are, again, as of this recording, they are building their first extension, the Main Street extension, which we have talked about, which would take it further south from Union Station, its current southern terminus, all the way to the University of Missouri, Kansas City, my alma mater. And then there's going to be the second extension, the Riverfront extension, the potential Mill Hill East of the streetcar line, which is supposed to start. They're supposed to start building it in a couple months, if I understand correctly. It's going to be a much shorter line, just going from the river markets to Riverfront Park. There has been a study on the third line. This one's called North Rail, which would take the streetcar into North Kansas City. The only problem is they haven't come up with the funding to do this yet. So that's going to be the next step for that particular project, is trying to come up with the funding, because as it turns out the transportation district model they've used so far will not work outside of that core. Not enough to cover the first half of funding that would be needed to ask for federal matching funds. Which brings us to this one, the potential fourth extension. So before I do turn it over, I'll just read from the study sheet here, the project overview. The Kansas City Area Transportation Authority, KCATA, in cooperation with several project partners, is evaluating an east-west high-capacity transit connection between the University of Kansas Health System, better known as KU Med, and Rock Island Corridor, Truman Sports Complex, Kaufman Stadium, and Arrowhead Stadium. Wait a second, didn't we just go over a public meeting where one of those stadiums is possibly going to be shut down, torn down, because the teams are moving downtown? Well, yes, but the Chiefs aren't going anywhere. They're likely staying. Arrowhead is going to be the home of 2026 World Cup games, and it is still a pretty vital point of access to eastern Jackson County. So Independence, Lee Summit, Raytown, which is like right next door, and Blue Springs. Also, the Rock Island Corridor, pretty much the trailhead for that is the Truman Sports Complex. So-called because Jackson County bought it from the Rock Island Railroad. Anyway, after nearly a year of studying potential alignment options and soliciting feedback from the public, the study team is presenting two narrowed scenarios for a potential high-capacity transit investment in the study area, which is pretty much Midtown Kansas City. And by the way, this would be all the stuff we're talking with streetcar, and for that matter, most of the major connections in Kansas City are north-south. This will be the first one to address east-west. And as you could probably guess, KU Med is involved with this state as well, so it becomes a bi-state thing. Barely bi-state, because KU Med says right on the state line, but bi-state nonetheless. So I'm going to shut up now. I'm going to turn it over to the experts who have been studying this. I also want to point out, near the end you will hear from now I'll just let the experts talk, and I'll jump in afterwards to provide some closing thoughts. All right, thanks and enjoy.
And we will go ahead and get started to be respectful of everybody's time. To start us off and kick us off, we're going to hand it off to the Deputy CEO of Kansas City Area Transportation Authority, Dick Gerald, to say a few words. First of all, let me say thank you. Everyone's mind was busy. We really appreciate the fact that you're coming out tonight. different presentations, running from Kansas City, Kansas, Wyoming County, over by KU Med Center, University of Kansas Health Systems, running east from there, through Kansas City, Missouri, all the way over to the Truman Sports Complex. So there's lots of potential in this corridor for lots of things. We're looking at transit right now. But transit is just one piece of improving the community. Maybe a great piece from our standpoint of public build, but we think it's an important piece of what we're looking at here. And what we really want today is to get input from the community and from you. And so I really want to say thank you for taking time out to be here and give us that input. What we're talking about here is a study, it's a partnership study. This is a partnership really unique in this region because it's a partnership between the University of Kansas Health Systems, Unified Urban Wyoming County, Kansas City, Kansas, the City of Kansas City, Missouri, Kansas City Streetcar Authority, and the ATA. So you have 5 partners working together at a regional corridor to really improve our community. And so we've been studying this for a while. I'm going to tell you tonight what we've been looking at. Some of the things we have as early conclusions, but more importantly, ask you to give us some input and some feedback as we go forward. Before we go any further, I do want to turn over the mic to Councilman Bunch. I'm really pleased that we have elected officials who've taken time out of their schedules to be here tonight. I really appreciate everyone's being here. Councilman.
Yeah, I'm actually going to see this for the second time because we did this presentation earlier, so I feel better prepared my name is Eric Bunch. I'm the 4th District City Council person, and I said the last time, just at 5 o'clock here, that prior to my election to City Council, I was a transit advocate. I still remain a transit advocate, just in a slightly different position these days. I'm really excited for this particular study because one of the things we hear over and over and over again, as we make big investments in things like Prospect Max and Main Street, streetcar line, and others, we need east-west transit connections. We need to connect the east side to the west side and ensure that folks have the ability to get from their homes to their jobs and other transit connections. So I'm a transit rider. I ride the bus probably 8 to 10 times a week, and I'm actually going to head out here and ride my cargo bike over to Costco down the street. What would be great is if we had a better bicycle transit facility right here on Linwood. But not to spoil anything, but we will be looking at some of these corridors here. Very excited and very supportive and really excited for this partnership as well. I think this is a really precedent setting to have really a high quality transit conversation that crosses the state line. So very happy to have my government and Casey working together on this as well, in addition to the transit partner. So thank you for being here. This plan does not work without your input. We can't possibly get to tangible, realistic solutions without your input. So please, thank you for being here and continue to participate in these types of events. Now, pass it back over to you.
Thank you for your ongoing support for transit and all you do for the community, and really taking time out tonight to be here and work through these sessions. Thank you very much. I'm going to turn it over to ATA's planning manager, AJ Ferris. He's also the project manager for this study, and he'll be leading the team in conversations. I will recognize a couple of others here before I turn it over. Tom Garrett, Executive Director of the Kansas City Streetcar Authority, and we have Jason Walden, the city's transportation director here with us tonight. And then, make sure I get the name right. Alyssa Marcy from Unified Urban Kansas City, Kansas is here with us as well. So the partnership team is well represented tonight. AJ?
Thank you, Dick. All right. As he said, my name is AJ Ferris. I'm the Planning and Scheduling Manager for the Kansas City Area Transportation Authority and the Project Manager for the East-West Transit Study. As Dick mentioned, we engaged in this study to identify a high-capacity, high-frequency transit solution between the 2 anchor locations of the University of Kansas Health System on the west side and the Truman Sports Complex on the east side. We began this process by developing our purpose and our need. So let's begin with our purpose, or our why. We're looking to improve access to jobs, healthcare, housing, education. We're We're looking to restore or to connect historically divided communities. We're looking to increase connections to our north-south corridors, and we're looking to reduce traffic congestion throughout our region. So now let's look at our needs. Our needs are what give us the information to support our purpose. We need to improve bi-state east-west connectivity. We need to improve connection to mobility services. We need to provide transit access for all users in our region. We need to provide fast and frequent transportation. And we need to create efficient and sustainable travel. So these purpose and needs then went into developing our guiding principles and methodologies, which you see here are categorized into our 4 groups. We have rider experience, which is looking at increasing connections, increasing rider, the rider accessibility, and looking at providing a high level of transit service to the folks in our region. We look at sustainability. This is where we look at using low or no emission vehicles to help us reduce emissions and improve our air quality. We look at transit support land use, which is creating compact mixed-use development and connecting historically divided neighborhoods, as well as improving access to, as I mentioned before, jobs, healthcare, housing, and education facilities. And finally, we have implementation and operations. We're looking at increasing transit speed and reliability, developing responsible transit investments, and finally, gaining buy-in from public and key stakeholders. So how did we get to where we are in this room? Back in July, in this process, we began developing our evaluation criteria. Alongside of that, we were conducting one-on-one meetings as well as stakeholder engagements. That then funneled into our Tier 1 screening, which is where we started to take all of the alignments and options in the corridor and started applying our evaluation criteria to help us start narrowing the funnel to get to where we are today, which is our Tier 2 screening, and that's what we're going to be talking about more today. And where you see that star is that second round of public meetings, which we're doing right now. The goal from these public meetings and Tier 2 analysis is to use the information gathered to then finally get to our preferred and recommended alternative. I'll be handing it over to our public engagement specialist, Alex.
Good evening. Thank you all for being here this evening. So we'll try to keep the energy high, and this is our second one here tonight. A little bit smaller than the first group, which is good. Give you all some more one-on-one time. So we had our initial survey kick off. You might have received it in the mail. You might have heard it in a radio ad. We sent out 20,000 postcards for folks to fill out this initial survey. Again, paid social media, paid media. And as AJ mentioned, we could do perform 30 one-on-one stakeholder interviews. These were with folks from all over the community, whether it be faith-based, nonprofit, business group, neighborhood group, really just looking to engage as many people in as many different ways as we could. So from that initial survey, a couple of key stats I want to point out is we did have 853 open-ended responses from those 1,800 folks who responded to the survey. Then we had 854 email addresses collected, so if you got an email about this project, chances are you probably filled out that first survey. So a couple of those questions in that initial survey which helped us confirm the purpose and the need of the study. One of those questions that we pulled from the list, how important is enhancing future connections to east-west transit for you and your business? On a scale of 1 to 5, the average score was 3.75. And the second question, how important is transportation to support the economic and community vitality of the project study area? Again, just talking specifically about the project study area, again, on a scale of 5, that average score was 4.4. So you might recall that first round of public engagement we did in the fall. We had a lot of boards. We gave everybody a lot of sticky notes and a lot of little sticky dots to come and participate in our public meetings. So what we showed the public at that time were these 11 different route alternatives. So 11 different transit corridor alignment options. So of those options, we broke it down west, middle, and east. And what we really wanted from the public on each of those as we look at the western segment is we didn't want anyone to feel like they had to draw a straight line across the project corridor. That if they selected 43rd Street, for example, on the west, that meant they had to carry it all the way through the project. that if it was easier for them in the middle segment to jump up to 31st Street, again, thinking of their transit use in this corridor, we wanted people to be able to mix and match. So that's why we broke this out into 3 segments, and we got that feedback on each of these 3 segments when we were evaluating the corridor. Again, this was that eastern segment. All these are in the packet as well. I do want to say we found out in that first presentation, the PowerPoint, I haven't updated my computer in a while, so it's probably my fault. The person's laptop we're using is using a newer version of PowerPoint, so some of the slides you'll see the formatting's a little bit off. So thank you for your patience as we get through that. The other thing we asked in the fall was the screening criteria. So these 18 screening criteria you see here, they were each applied to each of the 11 alternatives that appear in your packet that we asked about in the fall. And so from that, the ones that are starting green here, these were the top 5 that the public told us that was most important to them, which again, we carried into our screening process. The gold star there, which is on increase the number of people who use transit over driving, that was the #1 screening criteria with all the folks who participated, either online or in person.
So all of this information is publicly available at the study website, which is eastwesttransit.org. But this is a good time to stop and tell you what those 5 criteria he mentioned were. So he said number 1, which is represented by a gold star as opposed to the green for the other 4. Number 1 was increase the number of people who use transit over driving. We'll come back to that at the end. The other 4 criteria were increase connections to other transit services, improve rider access to the transit network, serve the greatest number of transit riders, and connections to key activity centers. Let's continue.
So a little bit about that engagement on this alternatives that we just went over. We did have 2 public meetings, kind of like this one here. In addition to that, we did 3 micro meetings where we met with Rosedale Development Association, KC Midtown Now, and then my favorite was we were at the YMCA Youth Night on a Friday night to help engage some of the youth on this project as well, because we know that they'll be the ones eventually using this system. So it was important to us to engage as many different folks as we could. So of all those meetings, we had 125 in person. We also hosted a virtual public meeting as well. With that, we had 66 participants at the virtual public meeting. And then you might have also filled out a map online. So what you'll see in the back of the room here tonight is we do have 2 plot maps. We had a digital version of this online that was open for about a month that people could drag and drop comments. They could fill out surveys and they could tell us their preferences in each of the 3 segments. So from that, we had almost 900 survey responses, estimated over 15 folks engaged on that online. And in total, we had 1,745 participate just on the alternatives engagement, leading us to 193 copies. So I'll go ahead and hand this off to Allison here, who will talk us through that screening process.
Hi everyone, I'm Allison Bushwick. I'm a consultant with HNTV. We're part of the project team focusing on the technical evaluation. So what I'm going to talk through is how we got from the previous 11 alignments that Alex walked us through down to the 2 scenarios that we're recommending move forward through the rest of this process. So for each of these alignments, they went through an evaluation with those 18 criteria shown. They got a score and a ranking so we could see which of the alignments rose to the top. So what's showing on the screen here is some of that elimination that took place through that evaluation. So on the west side of the corridor, 39th Street really rose to the top. That segment has the strongest ridership potential, system connectivity to existing transit lines, strong existing ridership, population density, and the fewest constraints from an engineering perspective. 43rd Street is no longer shown on the map. This one was eliminated. It had a lower ranking. to resolve. And then on 31st Street on the western end, the connection that was previously from 31st over to Southwest Boulevard and Rainbow was also eliminated at this point. There's just not enough population and employment density there today or projected into the future to support the cost of a high-capacity investment. Along the middle segment, 31st and Linwood rose to the top. They outranked the other alternatives on almost all criteria. Those corridors have strong ridership potential. They have dense residential employment land uses there. They both have sufficient right-of-way and more right-of-way actually compared to the other alignments in the middle area of the corridor. And then relatively low feasibility challenges from an engineering perspective. This corridor, we did retain the 39th Street alignment. While it wasn't a top-ranked segment, this was an alignment that was important based on the public feedback that we got in the fall, so we decided to carry this forward through this part of our evaluation. On the east end, we carried forward East Stadium Drive in one of the two US 40 alignments. They're shown in a hash line at this point because we realize that there's not sufficient ridership potential here with the existing population employment there to justify the high cost of a high-capacity transit investment. So moving forward, we're recommending that there still be a connection east of Van Run over to the stadiums and the Rock Island corridor, but this would likely be a service-only improvement rather than a capital investment of stations and other infrastructure.
Yeah, cutting in again. They had just talked about why the easternmost part of this study won't be. They'll have some sort of limited services, but they're not going to put down any meaningful infrastructure between Van Brunt, which is currently a big bus station, and the stadiums, and it simply goes between the two, regardless of whether you take Stadium Drive or 40. There's really not much to talk about in between. So they said, we'll just make it a bus service and only for certain events. Whether that changes or not, well, that remains to be seen. But for the time being, that is just going to be a once in a while bus. So we continue.
So from here, we moved forward what's shown on the screen into a conversation about mode. And to talk about mode, we zeroed in on the criteria that we're showing on the screen, including land use and ridership potential, engineering and physical constraints, the cost and funding options, an equity analysis, and the travel time in the corridor. So once we started talking about mode and continuing to evaluate, we further eliminated a segment from the middle section of the corridor in the east. So we eliminated from the middle section that 39th Street alignment, and this is due to primarily two reasons. The first being that there's more right-of-way space on 31st and Linwood, and that gives us flexibility in the design phase where we want to put stations, where we can fit track infrastructure in the case of streetcar, and in the case of a MAX line or a bus rapid transit line, that would allow us to consider dedicated lanes. That's something that hasn't been done for the MAX lines yet in Kansas City, but something that the team would consider moving forward. Additionally, 39th Street was eliminated when we were looking at our equity analysis. This considered a myriad of criteria, but one that was distinguishing and considering 39th Street to 31st or Linwood was the presence of commercial properties. So 31st and Linwood has by far outnumbers in terms of commercial properties compared to 39th Street, and so we want to be able to serve those commercial properties, giving people a transit option to patronize those for people that work at those businesses. One thing I'll point out on this slide before we move on, so we have lines drawn on the map at the western and east ends, but at this phase of study, we haven't exacted our terminal points. In the next phase of study, we'll look at that more closely, so there's more opportunities to consider where the project would terminate along Rainbow Boulevard, or where it would terminate on the east end in terms of tying into the stadiums and tying into the Rock Island corridor. The project team is also aware of the needs along the parallel routes, so the ones such as 39th Street and 35th that have been eliminated. That's not to say that those routes may not receive service improvements in the future, but have just been eliminated in terms of moving a high-capacity transit project forward. Okay, so now I'm going to talk through our first scenario, our streetcar scenario, before handing it back to AJ to talk through the next scenario. So this is the alignment we're showing at this phase of study for streetcar. We have 39th Street, again on the west end, anchored by the University of Kansas Health System. And then in the center of the corridor, we have where the majority of the alignment is. We're still showing two different options, 31st or Linwood. Both of these have similarities in terms of ridership potential, population employment density, but we think it warrants further evaluation. There are some differences we're aware of in terms of right-of-way space. Linwood is wider, and also the development character varies as you move east or west along this part of the corridor. For the connection point between 39th and 31st or Linwood, we're still keeping in the mix both Broadway or Main Street. We did a preliminary engineering review of these options. Both have some challenges, and so we want to keep looking at these in further detail to consider the cost of each and make sure we're coming to a good conclusion on things like the operational flexibility and the travel times here. But we, as part of this meeting, would certainly like your input as far as the alternatives that still remain. And then last, on the eastern end, again, this doesn't have enough ridership potential to justify the high cost of the streetcar investment. So for now, we would recommend a rubber tire solution for that connection there, or if over time the land development pattern intensifies here, we could revisit a streetcar option. Okay, so this slide is covering sort of the main considerations and takeaways for a streetcar investment. We've identified a corridor that supports high ridership and offers the best case return on investment for the high cost of a streetcar. But given that, it also offers the greatest economic development potential and reinvestment potential through attracting businesses and residences to generate growth in this part of the region. Streetcar also offers high-quality amenities and high-capacity vehicles to attract riders to this service. We know from local experience that a streetcar generates more ridership, attracts more people over and above other modes. Another consideration is that it's cut off on the bottom, but there's more disruption when you're constructing a streetcar. In our implementation timeline, we're estimating up to 4 years of construction. So considering the limited access to residences or businesses where the streetcar would be constructed. As far as ongoing considerations, I already talked through the first two, but the last one here would be considering the need for close coordination with our municipalities on the corridor in terms of land use policies. We want to be sensitive to the fact that streetcar will put development pressure on the corridor, and so we want to be mindful of how we can potentially mitigate any displacement along the corridor. Streetcar, we're estimating would cost to build $450 to $600 million and would have an annual operating cost of $6 million. The main takeaway on this slide is that we will need a new source of funding locally and federally in order to implement this scenario. On the local side, we do have an existing KCMO transit tax. However, this revenue is fully subscribed to existing services today. So if we were to use this, we'd have some trade-offs with reducing existing service. So not ideal. Transportation Development District is a tool that's in place. This was used for the Main Street extension of streetcar, funding 50% of that project cost and also funds a majority of those operation costs. If we were to use this on the east-west corridor, it's not likely that it would generate sufficient revenue to cover the same percent of costs. So that brings us to another option, or probably likely option, is going after some new transit funding sources, either at the city, county, or regional level. And this would be options such as sales tax, property tax, or income tax, or a host of other local fees that can be generated to help support this project. Private sector contribution is also an option, but likely this would be supplementary and just would need to be one of a package of funding of revenue sources. On the federal side, there are no operating dollars available for this project or for projects, transit capital projects in general. I'm sorry, for the operating side, but for the capital investment, the major program is the New Starts program. This typically covers up to 50% of capital costs, and likely this is a source that we would go after for this project. Other federal grants are available, but they are generally for smaller amounts of the overall project cost. Last, before we move on to the max option, our estimated timeline for implementing this scenario is 9 to 10 years. We have 1 year left in terms of our planning work, 2 to 3 years for engineering and environmental review, and a phase called project development that's part of the Federal Transit Administration's requirements for their funding, 2 years of final design, and then 4 years of construction, startup, and testing. We put our disclaimer on here that the project timeline could change once we get going on it. And the biggest factor for that would be how quickly we're able to identify funding for this. But back to you, AJ.
All right, thank you, Allison. We're going to be moving on into scenario 2, which is our bus rapid transit scenario, which we're calling our max buses. You'll notice this looks very familiar to scenario 1. It's pretty much the same alignment with that same dashed line at the end connecting 31st and Van Brunt to the Truman Sports Complex. But there are some key differences, and so we're going to kind of go over the profile of this scenario. This identified corridor does support high ridership potential and return for investment on the bus rapid transit scenario, but it is fewer and would attract less than the streetcar scenario. The cost for the bus rapid transit scenario is less at $30 million to $60 million, but again, there is also less impact for development and reinvestment in the corridor. Same thing goes for east of Van Brunt, that while the land use and density doesn't merit the investment and on the capital side as far as new stations, we would still continue to observe connections between 31st and Van Brunt and the Truman Sports Complex. The MAX service provides branded, high amenity, high frequency service, just like the streetcar. But one of the main differences is the MAX solution, or the bus rapid transit solution, has less construction impacts along the corridor than scenario 1. The same ongoing considerations are on the right side in blue, with our continued work with the municipalities and partners to identify ways that we can lower the risk of displacement and development pressure through the corridor. So we're going to talk about funding for the second scenario. The capital cost, as I've said, is between $30 million and $60 million, with an operating cost of less than $1 million. per year. We do have the local existing Kansas City, Missouri transit tax that, while it could not help with capital funding, it could potentially be used for operating funding. Although additional service along the corridor could still be covered by existing resources that would just need to be reallocated. We go down to a new local transit fund, which could either be city, county, or a regional funding initiative that could potentially help us on the capital and operating side. Then finally, probably the main difference, while it's a little similar, is that we could go after the CIG Small Starts program, which is different than the New Starts program and identify for smaller projects lower costs, such as a bus rapid transit scenario. And then, of course, we would continue looking at other grant and funding opportunities. The timeline is very similar to the first scenario, except that we have less years for construction to start up. So this could be implemented in 7 years. And this comes from our estimations from the Prospect Max project that we implemented in 2019. That took about 7 years from the beginning of planning to implementation in December of 2019. All right, so let's go ahead and compare the two scenarios. And I want to make a note at the very beginning that I don't want us to look at this as 4 check marks on the side of streetcar and only 2 check marks on the side of the BRT. This is just to help us understand that that while there are benefits to both scenarios, there are also challenges to both scenarios. So, as we look with rider experience, if we look at amenities and service frequencies, both scenarios are pretty much the same. But when we look at vehicle capacity, the streetcar scenario gets the nod. Then when we look at ridership potential, we've seen a very strong ridership demand for the streetcar scenario. So there's a high impact in scenario 1. For economic development and the reinvestment potential, I think we've seen through empirical data and the work the streetcar has done through the last couple of years in Kansas City, that there is a very high potential for economic development and reinvestment in the corridor. Emissions reduction and mode shift. While emissions reduction is pretty similar between the two scenarios, because both scenarios can use clean energy vehicles, the mode shift is where streetcar gets another nod. We've seen that there is a larger chance for people to choose the streetcar over their traditional automobile than there is when compared to a bus. Then we get to the capital and operating costs. As we've seen, there is a very large difference between the $600 million capital cost of the streetcar and the $60 million capital cost and operating costs of both scenarios. And then finally, we get into implementation, timeframe, and construction impacts, where we then see that, again, the second scenario has a quicker timeline and it has less impact during construction. So our next steps is taking away the information that we get from this round of public engagement from you all tonight, our continued analysis and our Tier 2 screening conducted by our consulting team and study team, and create and complete the analysis on route and mode. We would then share our final study recommendations, including our preferred alternative. We're already in the works of securing funding for Phase 2, which would include advanced planning, preliminary engineering, environmental work. Then we will continue our coordination with municipalities to examine supportive land use policies. This would cover everything from risk of displacement policies to development policies and parking policies and all the things in between there. And then we would finally execute our capital and operating funding to implement the project.
All right, so that's the bulk of the presentation. I left at the Q&A portion. This will unfortunately be after the survey has closed, but at this point they did ask, we found our survey asking for our feedback. Part 1, mode, streetcar versus max bus. Well, I obviously lean towards a streetcar for all the reasons they said, yeah, it's going to cost more, like to tune of 450 to 600 million to tear up streets and put in tracks and all that stuff. You know, the stuff that at the time of this recording we're dealing with on Main Street. And yeah, it's going to take a while because 9 to 10 years, that seems reasonable considering that the starter line didn't open until 2016. And the Main Street line, again, didn't start construction until last year, 2022. And it's not scheduled to open until 2025. And we're talking about from Union Station to UMKC is about 3.5 miles. From Main Street to Van Brunt along either Linwood or 31st. I used Linwood. I'll get to why I'm saying. It's also about 3.5 miles. And let's assume that Main Street is what they wind up using, because they're already putting track in on Main Street. From Main Street to Rainbow along 39th Street, that's another 1.4, 1.5 miles. So in total, about 5 miles worth of track that you'll need to install. It goes up to 0.8 if they include, if they choose Broadway for the final round, and not 31st. And that's the second question they asked. It's streetcar versus Main, 31st Street versus Linwood. They'll get to Broadway versus Main eventually, but just understand how much track we are talking about. So 3.5 miles already for the Main Street extension. That's to add on to 2.2 of the currently running track, and the 0.8 ran estimate that the riverfront extension will be. So 6.3 miles, and this could easily double that. So I'm not surprised at such the high costs, and considering North Rail is also going to be way expensive, $222 million in capital there. So yeah, and the reason I choose Linwood over 31st, that's the other choice. Linwood over 31st. Well, there are a couple of reasons. One, Linwood is flatter and therefore more conducive to a streetcar line. Two, it's wider, and you could easily put track in and not severely impact traffic. You're going to impact traffic, period, but it's not going to be as severe of an impact. And three, you're already going through shops I would go to, at least on Linwood. And four, and probably most importantly, Linwood is closer to the VA hospital than 31st Street is, and I thought that was one of the points of this line too, to make that VA hospital more accessible. So those were two things they asked our input on. But back to streetcar over MaxBus. Let's look over those that comparison scenarios they included. Rider experiences and amenities, vehicle capacity, service frequency. Streetcar is high. MaxBus, medium, high. Okay, yeah, the streetcar is way more regular in service. You could be at a stop and just wait like 15 minutes between the vehicles. So hopefully they're able to keep pace with that. Ridership potential much higher for the streetcar. And let's talk about this one for a second. Ridership potential. The bus is only as good as its frequency. Okay. Out here in Overland Park, I've been told that they increased bus frequency along Metcalf. Everything. I'll believe it when I see it. Because the bus system, particularly in this corner of the metro, has long been atrocious. All right. So, up in the frequency, yeah, that's a good place to start and keep that up, because I'm going to be asking the county when I get a chance, of course. Say, hey, let's get a study done. Let's get a study done, and let's look into streetcars on Metcalf, and if the budget's there, on Quivira as well. Well, three reasons for Quivira. 1, Oak Park Mall. 2, Johnson County Community College. 3, the Edwards campus for KU. Metcalf is pretty much the Johnson County version of Main Streets, and deserves such a service, and it would make use of the transit center currently saying in Mission. Let's make a actually transit center. That was one of the comments in this particular study. Yeah, let's make use of this as a transit center. And I have spoken with Tom Garand, the executive director of the Streetcar Authority, on such a potential. And he told me that it's all about getting the first get the Main Street extension done, and then you can spin it off from the Plaza stop. Okay, yeah, that's absolutely, that's outside the box thinking, and just logical thinking. Is this thing needs to be metro wide, which I will get to in a sec. And by the way, the irregularity of bus service, I'm going to address one politician in particular, one Charlotte O'Hara. Miss O'Hara, you say that transit has failed. Well, if it has, well, it's because of people, conservatives like you, who have failed to regularly provide bus service to this corner of the metro. When the only time you can really reliably get a bus is way early in the morning or after work, and it's not available at any other time during the day, and it's not available on weekends, well, guess what? People aren't going to show up for that. Okay? So maybe your approach to transit has failed, but under no circumstances should you say transit itself has failed. And while I'm on the subject, Johnson County Transit's big mistake divorcing yourself from the HCA. Huge mistake. Because again, your track record kind of suggests not quite sure what you're doing there. And as a result, you're forcing people like myself to drive everywhere. And during a time where we need to be more environmentally conscious and get off of oil and gasoline. Now, it sounds hypocritical of me as a car driver to be saying this, but it's true. It's true. I would much rather not be driving if I don't have to. You know? So don't say something has failed because it's been horribly mismanaged and horribly misoperated. All right. Economic development potential for reinvestment was extremely high with the streetcar. We see that right now. And over the last couple of decades, we've been talking about downtown redevelopments and what role light rail will play. Well, we're seeing it right now downtown. Investment that frankly wasn't there before. Certainly wasn't there 20 years ago. 20 years ago, Parent Light District was just empty parking lot. Just like we're talking about with East Village. And even that's going to have a contingency for a streetcar. One that's the Royals can easily fund on their own, part of their $2 billion package. So, emissions reduction mode shift from driving to taking transit is extremely high for the streetcar. And I expect it to be high on the extensions as well. And even the extensions, we're talking about economic reinvestment, seeing all sorts of it along main streets and even the riverfronts. Riverfront Park is still a very, that development is still very, very recent. And they're still building upon that. This will be the only other time on this podcast I evoke the name Brittany Mahomes. But her team's soccer stadium, that's where it's going to be, right there in walking distance of the riverfront. And thank God for that extension. Again, going to start building a couple months after I'm recording this. So those are all excellent reasons to get our asses out of the cars and onto rail. I think streetcar or light rail or whatever is the way to go for that. Buses are not. And the Max bus is another example of exactly what I'm talking about. Because we do have 3 currently operating Max bus lines. One, I have heard that they are just as inconsistent as the regular bus. And 2, let's look at the routes they take. Well, one is called the Main Street route, even though it doesn't really run along Main Street anymore. It runs more on Grand and Broadway. And then out further south to Brookside and Waldo. But that runs parallel to the streetcar, so that's a bad example. But the other 2 lines, those are good examples of what I'm talking about. One runs along Troost, which historically was the racial and still is to a degree the racial dividing line of the city. To the east it's poorer and then more likely to have African American families, and to the west it tends to be much more wealthy and more white. And you don't see a whole lot you see some development, but not nearly as much as if you ran streetcar down it. But the other street is Prospect, better known as the Ghetto, and with possibly the exception of where the streetcar would intersect, Prospect and Linwood, or Prospect 31st. The streets are really that close together, running in parallel. I myself don't necessarily feel safe 100% of the time on Prospect. And that's an area where having just the bus coming up and down has not spurred development. It is still very much ghetto. at this point in time. So and they get to the funding question of it, and that's important. As the current line, the current extensions, actually I think Port KC has something to do with the riverfront. They're being funded by TDD, a Transportation Development District, which unfortunately the model doesn't really work outside of that zone. Because we're talking about the most densely populated portions of Kansas City being served by that streetcar right now. But if we're going to get out further, then they need to find some new funding. They're talking city, county, regional funding initiatives. I'm all for that. Private sector contributions, all for that too. Let's put our money where the mouth is and take it further outside the TDD. And for anyone bitching about, it's just a gimmick and everything, this project alone is going would suggest to me, no, it needs to, it's on its way to not being a gimmick. All right, this is the way of the future. All right, it won't completely replace driving, but it will get us a step closer to being less dependent on the automobile, at least downtown and midtown. All right, and having a regional funding thing is going to come into play a little here, because a state line is being crossed for this one, because KU Med is in Kansas. The rest of the line's in Missouri. And if you want to look holistically, North Rail takes it over the Missouri River into Clay County, into North Kansas City. So that's another county and municipality that would need to be taken into account. Again, talking with transit people, it needs this. This is the backbone of what will hopefully be a metro-wide system. So why not make all these decisions together as a metropolitan area and shut up people like a Charlotte O'Hara saying, hey, transit's the way to go. So let's all come together and make it happen. And I'm going to close with a statement to one Logan Healy, because you're stealing from me when you talk about streetcars on Metcalf on social media. Because let's not forget, there was one candidate in that 2021 Ward 1 race who did talk about streetcars, me, and I will confess I stole the idea from Matthew Kalkara. If you don't listen to me on anything else, Logan, listen to me on this. And no, you're not going to come on here and talk with me. So, he's on my permanently banned from the podcast list. But I am going to give you this advice. All right. This study is started a year ago. All right. You are in a position that you can say, all right, let's do a study. How is a streetcar in Overland Park in Johnson County, how's that going to work? What routes is it going to go? What kind of stops are we going to have for this? How are we going to fund it? And how long is it going to take to construct? if you're really serious about this and not just pandering like I think you are, then you'll want to look into at least getting a study started today. Otherwise, shut up. All right. And I'm going to make the same appeal to our new county executive, Mike Kelly, former mayor of Roland Park, and my understanding, a progressive individual, as well as County Commissioners Fast and Hanslick. Okay, it's great that we're getting the more regular bus service, but that shouldn't be the end goal for what we're trying to do here in our county. The streetcar is a great thing. The streetcar is a great thing right now. And it would be foolish enough of us to turn our back on that as a county. So I will come during my spring break down to Olathe to the county commissioners meeting, and I'll use public comments time to say, hey, the time is now to get a study started. All right. I'm not necessarily in a position to do such a study, but I will advocate for it. I know people will advocate for it too. So yeah, fun times to be a Kansas Citian. I'm just going to leave it at that. And that is a great place to end today's podcast. So thank you all for listening. And we will talk to you next time.
This podcast is Uncalled For is hosted, produced and edited by Mike Chernevsky. Opening music is I Thought You Were Cool by Holy Isna CC0, licensed under a Creative Commons 0.1.0 Universal License. The outro music for this episode is District 4 by Kevin MacLeod at Incompetech.com, licensed under Creative Commons by Attribution 4.0 license. To learn more about this project, go to eastwesttransit.org. Please like, share, and subscribe to the podcast through your favorite podcasting platform, like our Facebook page at facebook.com/uncalledforpodcast, and check out our blog with show notes at uncalledfor.home.blog. If you are in the United States or Canada, you can call us at 816-832-5160. Leave your message or question for us, and if we like it, we will play it on the podcast. Please support the podcast and purchase our exclusive Uncalled For merchandise. T-shirts, sweatshirts, mugs, stickers, and so much more. Go to www.cafepress.com/uncalledforpod. Thank you so much for listening. We will see you next time.